Okay, folks, welcome tonight to our wild turkey hunting webinar segment 2, firearms, ammo, clothing, footwear, miscellaneous equipment, calls, and calling. My name is Walter D. James. I'm the Hunter Engagement Coordinator. And tonight I have with us John Henry Harrelson, who's our District 4 wildlife biologist. He'll also be assisting with hunting. And I have Master Sergeants Nathan Cox and Eric Gleason assisting with regulations. So welcome. Our webinar rules of engagement. This is a 1-hour webinar. We usually try to stay in time. It is recorded and distributed by March 1st. As was discovered in the registration protocol, there's a statement when you got the booking ID that said this webinar will be recorded. So if unable to view on the scheduled date, you can always view at your convenience. And that is absolutely true, but not immediately. Convenience is a relative word in this case, meaning they have to be processed by our IT staff. So please be patient and be assured that I will get them out ASAP. The question and answer session is 30 minutes. Questions in writing, topics specific to tonight, which is firearms, ammo, clothing, footwear, miscellaneous equipment, calls, and calling. And I would ask that instead of writing the question immediately, give us a chance to cover the material. That way we can offer more questions later on at the Q&A rather than write about things that we haven't covered yet. So a good way to do that is maybe take a notepad, write the question down, and then if we don't get it, turn it into the Q&A at the end, and it will be addressed then. Chat hand raising may be monitored if there's something specific, but otherwise keep the question topics to what we're going to discuss. And as always, there is a brief programmatic why repeated for each webinar because not everybody attends every webinar. That is our website. That's where you can find everything. That is your key to the outdoors. And again, thanks for joining us tonight. The reason that this programming is being done both in this state and in other states is due to the precipitous decline in hunting participation since the 90s. And that what you're seeing is based on a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service survey done every 5 years. We're expecting the 2021, which is the next one coming up probably this summer. So we'll see where we stand. And that is nationally. In North Carolina, license holders have been increasing. And in fact, here, lifetime licenses are extremely popular. A lot of people get them for infants that may or may not even hunt, but they are popular and it is a contribution to conservation. As you can see, however, estimated active hunters are much less and are relatively stable, but over the last couple of years, since about 2017, 2018, have been going down a little bit. But again, kind of my goal, at least my way of thinking, stabilization is a good thing, not continued decline. One of the biggest concerns I have, and probably by all states, is that as I call the greatest number of North American hunters of all time, the baby boomer generation, modern day North American hunters, is aging out. And they're going to leave a big gap. And so that's why I'm excited to work with a lot of these new folks that didn't grow up in hunting families that are coming in interested in getting started hunting. Thinking in terms of the population as a whole, even those high amount of license holders is very small in comparison to the entire population of the state. And you can see estimated active hunters even less. But we don't want to get it so low that we don't matter anymore. I mean, this is an activity that may be not part of the new heritage. It was part of my heritage, but for some folks it wasn't. But time spent outdoors, hunting, getting your own food, just like growing a garden, is something worth hanging on to. One way to do that is for us to be responsible when taking public trust resources legally. And that's what they are, public trust resources that are managed by state and federal governments for the public. And so someone stealing from that is committing a violation. They're stealing from everybody. So as we say, you see something, say something. We have these mobile devices now. You see somebody doing something illegally, you don't need to confront, just take a picture and turn it over to our enforcement folks. That we don't need to go back to the day when there were no regulations and we almost lost all of our wildlife. Obviously, this is the other thing that happens not only with hunters, but with anglers, with hikers. Don't be leaving garbage out there. If you pack it in, pack it out. And this happened to be a camping area on one of our game lands. things that shouldn't be left. And even if you need to go to the restroom, like in that top right photo, even a cat is smart enough to cover it up. Don't make it look like we're a bunch of, basically slobs out there. And again, a lot of people do it, sadly, but let's put an end to it. Let's get these people fined and stop from doing this. So obviously the two things I'm involved in is the hunting webinars, what you're experiencing now, primarily about demand species like turkey and deer, but we plan on doing squirrel again. We did squirrel last year. And then the other one is the Getting Started Outdoors workshops for individuals that have not had social support. They didn't grow up in hunting families. They want to get started, but they don't know how. That's a very basic in-person workshop. And many of the things that hunters already know, like how to shoot, tree stands, ground blinds, game recovery, scouting for sign, many hunters already know that. So a webinar provides that, and that's why they're both for new and experienced hunters, whereas the GSO is for people that are totally brand new. So, and we'll be throwing a lot of stuff at you with these webinars. So hopefully you'll enjoy them. They are experiments to offset participation decline, and only time will tell how well they're going to have an impact. These are many of the conservation partners that are currently involved in both GSO and the webinars, but even within these groups, it's a very small handful of people. And so we constantly need more support, especially since I've been expanding programs from GSOs to 1 or 2 a year, now up to about 8 a year, and even building the webinars themselves. Volunteer support is critical, both in instructors and post-workshop hunters, post-workshop mentors, and as well as applicable venues. If you have a property and you're interested in hosting a GSO, we'd like to hear from you. So if you want to join that GSO team of volunteers, that's my alias, gso@ncwildlife.org. Let us know. And on the volunteer website, which if you scroll down the bottom of our page, you are going to see volunteer. And when you click on that, you'll see a couple of different items you can volunteer for. And one of them is Getting Started Outdoors. And here's some of the ways you can be involved. And keep in mind, folks, that I have folks coming in all the time. So what I'm experiencing is there are far more wanting than willing. And so even if you're not interested in taking somebody out on your own, and I'll admit that very few people do I take on my own, but indirectly, you can mentor thousands by being involved in the programming. And it does really help, especially with these typically young adults. And most of those GSO workshops are people 25 to 40 or even older. So first, as we start the equipment review, it's John Henry's version first, and then I'll do mine. And again, like I say, hold back the questions because we're going to give them an overview of what we carry, kind of some things that we use here. And so John Henry, take it away.
Appreciate it, Deke. Appreciate it. So my name is John Henry Harrelson, and I am a district biologist with the Wildlife Commission. Oh, I want to try to make sure. So I covered District 4, which is the southeastern part of the state. I have been a turkey hunter for probably the last 10 or 12 years. And I actually got the opportunity to participate the last couple of years in turkey research occurring in the state, and got to band a couple hundred birds and release them and follow them around with transmitters. So I'm speaking from experience, but there's always something to learn in the turkey woods, that's for sure. So before I go hunting, there's a couple things that I consider or I think about for my planning and what I'm going to take when I go in the woods. So first off, am I going on a piece of private ground or am I going on public ground? Because if it's public ground, I have to make sure I have my permit. If it's a permit only area, I need to make sure I get up earlier probably to ensure that I may get there to get a spot, because I may be competing against other people. If it's private ground, how far away is it? Have I done any scouting in the past? The next thing I consider about is, you should consider is what kind of habitat or terrain you're going to be going in. The coast is definitely different than the mountains. And you'll be hunting different on the coast than you will in the mountains, because on the coast, we usually have big fields, lots of pine trees. And in the mountains, you're primarily hunting hardwoods or small fields. So those things matter because it's going to matter what I carry in the woods. And The next thing is, have I ever been there before? If I've been to a place, hunting or scouting in general, it's going to raise my awareness, and I'm going to be more educated about the area. So in turn, I may not need to get there as early, or I may already know where the birds are roosting because I've done a lot of scouting beforehand. If I've never been to a place and it's like, well, I'm going to pick a point on the map, oftentimes I want to get there early because you never know what you may encounter on that walk in, on to your new spot. The next thing is who's coming with you or who you're going to be taking. If I have my kids come with me, I'm definitely thinking about bringing snacks. I'm definitely thinking about where I can hunt because my kids can only walk so far. They can only be quiet for so long. And if I'm hunting at a new place or at a place I've already got established, do I have a blind set up, especially for my kids? Am I going with an inexperienced friend and I'm kind of being the leader? So in turn, I may bring more gear with me because he may not have it. Or am I going with a mentor, which is, I'm fending for myself and I don't have to really think about that other person. The next thing, and probably one of the most important, is how long do you plan to hunt? And 30-minute hunts oftentimes aren't realistic for turkeys. I tend to like to allocate a couple hours at least, but you hunt as long as you can. So if I'm going all day, I'm definitely thinking about taking water. I'm taking snacks with me. I'm thinking about what kind of weather's going to be happening. Is it going to be raining? But those are all things you should consider. So for me, I've hunted with a couple of different types of guns, and these are all relatively, I'd say, inexpensive firearms. I think the most expensive one is probably that 410 on top. So I've killed a couple of turkeys with that 870 410 shooting TSS shot. I would encourage you, if you want to go the 410 route, which is kind of a big thing right now, to shoot high quality shells. The next gun down is just a over and under a Yildiz, a 20 gauge. So, not anything special. That's a $400 shotgun. I got it at Academy. You can buy screw in chokes for it. And then I've shot guns with a 3.5-inch Benelli Nova right there. So something that'll blow your shoulder off. And all those guns weigh differently. All of them have different effective ranges. All of them, you see, I'm shooting a little bit different size shells. But the gun I've been shooting the last couple of years is a 410, and you see I have a little red dot on it. I shoot TSS shot. I'm not repping a brand or anything, but I've shot a couple of different brands. I would encourage you to pattern your shotgun before you go, so you know how far you can shoot. You see stuff on the internet all the time, like, oh, I can shoot 60 yards with TSS. I say my comfortable range is 35 yards with a 410 and TSS. I've killed a couple birds with it now. My little girl's killed a bird with it. That's what I feel comfortable. Do I think it could kill a bird further? Potentially, possibly, but I could also possibly wound that bird. And as graceful and as majestic as these animals are, as honestly, as hard as it is to get birds to 2 years old, where they're a good gobbling turkey, we treat them with respect and we want a good clean kill. So I make the choice not to shoot turkeys further. I've shot a turkey with my 12 gauge at 60 yards, and that's realistic as well. But turkey hunting is about getting them close. It's not about how far you can shoot them away. At least it isn't for me. It's up close and personal, and that is really the appeal for turkey hunting for lots of people. Most folks have have vest. You see, I'm rocking an Academy vest from like 10 years ago. So it is well worn in. In fact, I actually just bought a new vest and it got here 2 days ago, and I'm not even sure I like it. I've tried it on, but I'm not sure it's going to be what I carry. I would encourage you to at least have some pockets to carry some gear, because turkey hunting can be gear heavy. I carry decoys with me. I hunt on the coast. Oftentimes I hunt around fields or in fields. So I like having decoys out so birds can see them, so they can see what's making the call. If you're hunting in a wooded area, decoys aren't necessary oftentimes. If you're hunting on where you have lots of terrain, Decoys aren't necessary oftentimes. However, if you're hunting in the open, a turkey has great eyes. And if he can't see the turkey that's calling to him, then he's going to get suspicious sooner or later and not come over. So you either have to set up where you make that bird come to you where he only sees you, he only would see that hen and he be in range when he makes that step, or you have to set up where he can see decoys. So I choose to carry decoys. They're all different kinds. Those are AVNX decoys, and you see mine are even pretty beat up. I've added some extra glue to the head, but they do a pretty good job. The other decoy that people often have right now is this full body decoy or something similar with a real turkey fan. I typically don't carry this just because the fan gets tore up. However, if you're hunting fields or if you have private land, there is a technique called reaping, which you use that full fan and that full body decoy or something similar to this and entice the bird over. I would encourage you to not do that on public ground. I would encourage you, if you're going to choose this technique, which is all over YouTube. However, you should know in some states it's already been outlawed because of safety, because you're hiding behind something that looks real. So you could get shot by another hunter, which is why a lot of places have stopped allowing this on public land or even on private land. But it's an effective means of killing a turkey without a doubt. As far as what I carry in my vest, I usually have a couple face masks with me. I actually just got a new face mask that's a 3/4. You get a face mask you like, a face mask you're willing to wear, and a face mask where you can use your mouth, especially if you're going to use mouth calls. I carry gloves, usually have a backup pair of gloves. I carry one call and a striker, some kind of abrasive material to work that call. And just going across here, I have toilet paper, paper towels, or napkins, just for when nature calls. I carry a pair of clippers with me to clean out a spot where I'm going to sit down, or if it's a bare spot, to cut some debris to make around me or to put around me. One of the big things is you are trying to blend in. Turkeys are very, very visual birds. So you want to have a good backdrop. You want to have some back cover. I like to have side cover. I really like to have as much cover as I can. I usually wear a hat. If you're hunting on the coast, you're definitely going to want a thermocell. Even at the beginning of the season, I carry lightweight binoculars now. In fact, I carry a chest harness that you see other folks using now. I carry that as well. I usually have a couple extra shells with me. I have a snack at the minimum, at least one bottle of water. And then I have my calls with me. So I have a couple mouth calls I carry. Maybe I carry my wing bone, maybe I don't, depending on how good or how confident I feel about it at the moment. I have one crow call I carry, and then I have a turkey tote that I use to get out. So you see, I'm relatively minimalist in comparison to some people. Some people carry just a few things in their cargo pockets. It's whatever you want to do. The main thing is you got to have a shotgun, you got to have a shell, a mouth or call would help, but that's the main thing you have to go hunting. As far as clothes go, you do want to wear camo or at least muted tones. I actually have a matching set of camo. That's my only matching set of camo, which is the green leaf there on the left. I usually, in fact, now I'm wearing brown pants on the bottom. I've got into where I feel like that blends in just as well, especially on the coast where I'm sitting in pine forest and you look at all the pine needles and they're brown, they're not green or gray. Most pine needles are brown. I usually wear a low top boot or my muck boots, depending on how wet it's been or how dry it's been. And then I have a jacket. Something I bought last year was a leafy top. And that thing is phenomenal. It's lightweight. It doesn't necessarily protect me from the insects, at least the one I got. However, I feel it helps me blend in drastically in some open areas. I also wear muted socks. I don't wear white socks. In fact, I don't own any white socks because of turkey hunting. because my pants leg, when I'm sitting down, I have my knee pulled up. Oftentimes it cinches up a little bit and a little bit of my sock is exposed, especially if I'm wearing low cut boots. And you don't want any white to be exposed. You want everything to blend in as much as possible. So just a little hot tip for you guys. The next thing you could potentially carry or not carry, and it's all up to you and all about the situation or the land you have to hunt on. Big thing I use for my kids are ground blinds. On a piece of property that I have access to, and I know no one's going to mess with my stuff, I have multiple ground blinds set up that allow me and my kids to have cover that are comfortable, that I don't have to set up in the dark. Guys now, or folks now, are really starting to carry these low chairs that allow you to not have to sit directly on the ground or sit directly on your cushion, but get you up off the ground a little bit and make it a little more comfortable. I don't own one. However, I got buddies that do, and they rip and rave about how much more comfortable it is. You can also carry some mesh netting like you have here on the bottom. When me and my kids hunt outside the ground blind, when we're running and gunning per se, or on permit hunts, I carry something like this in my bag, and I kind of stick up around us just to help conceal movement. Like I said, turkeys are very visible. So my little girl, she's 8, she'll be down there fidgeting. You just don't even realize they get bored and start moving their hands. And next thing you know, the turkey's at 20 yards looking at us, and it's too late at that point. The other thing that I've invested in that is a big investment is a nice tripod for her. It helps us have the gun ready, especially in the ground blind. And it's actually benefited me deer hunting, because I now take that thing when I go hunting at ground blinds for deer season. And my original intention was just to use it for her turkey hunting. But those things aren't really necessary. You can get by with a lot less, or you can get by with a lot more. I'm carry just a few calls with me. I would encourage you to try a bunch of mouth calls to figure out which one you like. And each one, makes a little bit different sound. And the turkeys may be into one sound when they're not into another. So you got to have a couple different ones to try. I carry a very simple acrylic call there with 1 or 2 strikers with me, my crow call, and then my wing bone call there on the side. Just getting proficient with that. I wouldn't even call myself proficient with that wing bone call, but those are what I carry. Some folks carry lots and lots of calls, but I don't see a need for that, at least not for me at the time. Some other calls you can think about carrying are trumpet calls, or pot calls, peg calls, and we're going to go over that in detail here on that video in just a few minutes that we're going to have. The last thing I'll say is, if you're looking for a gobbler to gobble and he's not gobbling at you, making a hen sound, you can also get him to gobble at a couple different other things, pretty much any loud noise. In fact, Meat Eater has a t-shirt just on things that make a turkey gobble. I owl hoot with my mouth, so I don't carry an owl hoot. That's a common call people often take with them. I do carry a crow call. If you're in the mountains, maybe an elk bugle will work, maybe a woodpecker call. But that's an additional call outside of a normal call that makes turkey noises that you may want to have on you, that may be a tool that you can use when you're looking for a bird, or in the pre-dawn when you're looking for a bird to gobble off on the roof. So those are something you should think about. All right, Deep.
Thank you, John Henry. Okay, so we're going to run over some stuff here. And as we're getting started, I warn you, I am a retail therapist. And although probably turkey hunting is where I carry the least stuff, I do like my turkey hunting gear. This is an example of a few firearms. That top is a 10 gauge. The next one down is a 12 gauge. Both the top and the one down are semis. Then the one below it is a 20 gauge semi with an optic on it. The tops just have like regular sights that I mounted to the rib. Then there is a 410 that currently has open sights there that I recently put a red dot on. And then there's that bottom one that doesn't look like the turkey gun per se. The turkey guns have that typically that camo look, or just like a plain flat black, sometimes with wood or all black. But even that bottom gun with the right choke and the right load combination will work fine. So you don't need to spend a ton of money, but you may want to. And the problem with me is I am unsupervised, and so I like turkey guns. This is the creme de la creme of turkey guns, meaning choke. And really, this is an example of just a flush mounted, a flush choke that goes in the barrel. It's just flush against the top of the barrel. Chokes typically come in 3 constrictions, but there's more. It's improved cylinder, which is a little tighter than the bore of the gun. Then there's a modified choke and a full choke. The full choke tends to be the tightest. And that's typically what is used for turkey hunting, because you want that concentration of shot close together. Well, all these other are extended. They go beyond the barrel, and they have varying degrees of constriction depending on the shot types you're using. Do you need all of these? Absolutely not. This one here that comes in the gun when you buy it, and it's typically, unless you're buying a turkey gun, it'll be a flush mounted. A full is great, and sometimes even with certain shot loads, a modified can work, because it depends on the way it acts with the type of shot and the density of shot. You heard John Henry talking about TSS. The normal's copper plated lead, and of course I'll get into that in a second. The main gauges that are used are obviously a 10 gauge, old school, that was of my era. And I have enough candles on the cake, 62. That's some of the hunters were using these big payload of shot. That's a 3.5-inch 12. And in some of the turkey guns, they are 3.5 inches, a 3.5 10. And you don't need a 3.5. A 3 is good, even a 2 3/4, but these have been popular for turkey. A 20 gauge is a much lighter load, but these, with that new TSS that John Henry talked about, or even the heavy shot, have become very popular, and in some cases have actually replaced these. With these, you're going to get a lot more recoil, especially with a non-gas cycling type semi, and milder to shoot, great patterns. And of course, he mentioned the 410. And now with that premium shot, the 410 went from like, don't even use it for a turkey unless he's like 10 yards, to, like John Henry said, you could squeeze out potentially 30. But the goal is, as he said, and he couldn't have said it better, you want to get that bird as close as possible. The thing to remember, though, about the inch of the length of the shell is that your barrel of your gun that you currently have, or that you decide to buy, if you buy one, it says like for 2 3/4 or 3 inch, and you don't go to 3.5. And then some are to 3.5 inch. So make sure you're matching the ammo to that gun and do not exceed it, or you'll end up with a barrel burst or worse. These are many of the turkey loads, and the common staple was lead and copper plated lead. That's what most of these are. They're still out there. They're still very good. Then we ended up with these heavier shells, or this, well, this is a Magnum blend of a coated shot. Then there was a heavyweight, and what they were is denser than lead, heavier than lead, and they also didn't malform. The reason they put copper or even nickel on lead shot is to prevent flat spots. Flat spots on shot cause them to scatter. It creates little planing surfaces. And so the idea was to make them as hard as possible with a coating. Well, now with these heavyweights like bismuth that are much denser than lead, and this TSS that John Henry talked about, that stuff doesn't flatten. It maintains uniformity, very tight patterns, but it's at a cost. Or something like this might be $1 or $2, probably $2 a round, depending on where you buy it. This, you're talking anywhere from the 410 at $5 or $6 a round, 20 gauge about $8 or $10 a round, 12 gauge 12 to 14. And I've even seen some recent ones that were in 12 gauge 3.5 for pretty much almost $20 a round. So if you have deep pockets and you want high performance, yeah, that's where you're going to get it. But it's still shot. It still slows down. It extends the range, but nobody should be shooting turkeys at extreme ranges. Get them in close. Guns, loads, and patterning. Most people that have a shotgun that have shot clay birds or shot doves, They don't worry about patterning. They know that that shotgun has a pattern like the pellets here, and eventually it's probably going to hit the bird and the bird's going to come down. The difference with a turkey gun is you want, again, that tight, uniform pattern in this head and neck region. You want the spine and the brain. The more pellets you get in there, the quicker, cleaner, and more humane the kill. And here's the problem. If that gun don't have the sights on it, just maybe a bead on the end, that's okay. It's good like that. But you may find when you sit down on a bench and you try that load, even if it's a turkey load, the densest part of the pattern could be here, or here, or here, or here, and sparse in here, which could mean a cripple. It is your responsibility as a hunter to take that gun to the range. And if you have no sights, try some different shells. Get together with your friends, go over to the shooting range, try some different ones. And oddly enough, you'll find one that shoots better in that barrel than the others. Why it happens, I don't know. It's a great mystery, but it's true. If you're able to put an optic on the gun, sights, or either a scope or a red dot, then you can fine tune whatever turkey load you have. But having said that, even that turkey load itself, you'll see some that'll have a dense uniform pattern, others they have flyers in it, and even the consistency between turkey loads can be a little bit different. But folks, you have to do it. And I throw this in here. Wait, there's absolutely no need to pattern a gun that already produces a pattern of shot. Wrong. You've got to do it. If you don't, you're doing a great disservice to that noblest of game birds, the wild turkey. Here's an example of some targets that I took just for the purpose of this webinar. Know your maximum effective range. And you remember last night me saying in the turkey hunting rules, safety rules, keep shooting your zone of fire. If you know your maximum effective range, you'll know your zone of fire. And here's an example of 20 yards. Now that density of the shot, I would have adjusted that. That's just one time with a certain turkey load I tried. There's the densest part of the pattern. I would move it up a little bit higher. But you can see at close range, you got a real good cluster there, broken the spine. That bird's going down, even though I'd rather some up here. So I would have moved that up. At 40 yards, you can see how that opens up. And that's only 20 more yards. And we've still got some in the spine. And we got a couple in that head, kind of close to that brain case there, which is still good. But even me, I look at that pattern, I'm like, yeah, okay, it's a kill, but I'd almost want to say, well, that gun's 30, 35 yards, somewhere in between there. And then again, that person that says, yep, I shot a turkey at 70 yards. Well, yeah, maybe they got lucky. But look where this is at 60 yards. It appears you have a few here, none in the head, none in the upper neck. And that could be a bird. I'd like to say he would have went down in here, but maybe not. And these do not count. Body shots on turkey with shot will not hold them. It's got to break that spine and it's got to break that head. And the vitals are way down here and the pellets don't get through that. So the bottom line there, after beating that horse to death, respect and empathy for wildlife. These are not simply targets for our amusement. And here's a good way to do it. When you're about ready to shoot that turkey and you will be excited, put yourself in that turkey's place. How would I want to be taken out? Would I want to get a couple pellets in me and I run off, or would I want to be taken out cleanly? So think about that. When it comes to shotgun and a bow, shotgun's always here. That's the zone. And then depending on the range, that pattern spreads out. With a bow, you're going for right around this wing butt, because in behind that wing butt, that's where the vitals are on a turkey. It's kind of hard to hit the neck. You could shoot there, but you're going for that vital cluster. If you're with a bow, if you go in that entry, you're going to be in the vitals, or even here in the front, or here with it puffed up, with it in strut, it's going to be there. So you can shoot at the head, and I'll show you a razor head in a second, but those are typically bow shots, not body shots with a shotgun. And when you're looking at vitals, and it's all relative here, especially with a pitcher, but there's the wing butt, there's where the vitals are. Wing butt right around here. There's where the vitals are. Keep in mind that turkeys do not leave good blood trails. And in fact, you're lucky if you get a speck. So for example, if you hit it with an arrow and it runs off, which it sometimes will, or it doesn't immediately go down and stay down, ask yourself first, you saw it. Did he roll the gobbler or did he fly or run off? If he fly or run off, he may not go far. You're going to have to look for him. And even if you rolled them, I've had one time, and the longer you hunt, you're going to have something where you pull a shot, but then you try to avoid it afterwards. I've had one roll, I rolled him, puffed the feathers, and he pitched off. So that's why you want to make sure that pattern's right. It's close. You're not shooting beyond your effective range. Pay attention to the travel because you're going to want to go search for it. Look for scuffed up leaves, broken twigs, because again, they're not going to bleed. I shot one time on a high ridge, went all the way down to a river, probably 150 yards, and I found it just by looking for this. Peek into nearby blowdowns or undercut creek banks, because typically turkeys will go there to hide if they're wounded. Stop occasionally, look around, in case it just moved off to an edge and not directly down over the hill. Walk circling or parallel transects. That's a good way to find it. And don't give up again till you're convinced the bird escaped unscathed. That's so very important. With archery equipment, unlike guns, legislator doesn't regulate firearms. We were talking about gauges and shot. That's what you want to use. And as Nathan pointed out yesterday, no larger than a 10 gauge is legal. But with archery equipment, we do have regulations. And whether it be a longbow or a recurve, it has to be a 40-pound pull minimum. Keep that in mind if you're going to bow hunt. 35-pound pull minimum for a compound, which has the wheels on it, the one on the top, or a crossbow that has gotten more popular now, especially with a lot of folks. 100-pound pull minimum with that. Also regulate the broadheads, 7/8 inch fixed or mechanical. And you can see some are mechanical in that these little blades will be tight, and then when it hits the animal, it expands, creating a larger wound channel, or these old standbys. This is an example of a guillotine. That is one that is often used to take the turkey's head off. It allows for a margin of error. You got like 4-inch blades. And you take that head off, that bird's not going anywhere except flopping around on the ground. With my gear, typically starting at the very basic, and I have several slides here, I'll typically start out with something real light. If it's warm, I've carried this camo forever. It's probably 100,000 miles on it. Jacket, pants, just a t-shirt. I typically will wear a polypropylene base wire layer and then a wool sock. That polypropylene base layer wicks moisture away because wool, even when it's wet, it's warm, but your feet will be wet. The polypropylene pulls it away. These or even a tennis shoe will work on flat land. You don't need the ankle support. Of course, you don't want chiggers in your ankles. That's bad. That's where you might want to use me, D. Mostly because I have preferred hunting in the ridges, I want ankle support, higher boot. If it's wet, if there's a lot of wet conditions, you might want to use rubber or the muck boots. And granted, keep in mind that, yeah, you're not getting any water in these for sure, or sometimes the others leak, but your feet sweat a lot. And so that will hold water, especially if you're walking real far. As the gets warmer, I do like the snake boots. I like snakes. I'm a fan of snakes, especially pit vipers, but I don't want to get bit by one. If I can see where I'm walking, I'm not so concerned, but as the vegetation fills up and it gets warmer, I'll wear these. But since I hunt mostly in the cooler climates, I rarely have them on because it's too cool yet, especially in the northern states. So kind of tying some more warmer weather things, a heavier jacket if I need it, a hoodie, a sock hat, and of course camo. And yes, I do wear camo briefs. You don't need them, but I like them. A base layer if it's a little cooler. Again, polypropylene. My turkey hunting hat, an orange hat for when I'm moving. A boonie sometime if there's a lot of sun. I like a half mask that I can easily take down and take up. I used a bag in the head mesh if the insects are, the mosquitoes are bad, because as soon as that starts going, you want to be swatting yourself. And what you won't see with me is a thermocell. Even though I have it, I never use it because I'm typically hunting in the cooler climates and I'm typically done by the time it starts getting real warm. Camo hanky, never, ever wear any of this. As John Henry pointed out, t-shirts, never, ever anything like that. These wool gloves, I like to cut the fingers off. They definitely are warmer than just a regular camo glove, but you still have dexterity. The flap over gloves are nice when it's real cold, and I've had freezing mornings in the 20s where these were really nice. And of course, a camo belt typically as well. With the vest, I do love a vest. I have lots of vests. I've been trying so many for so many years. Again, retail therapist, but this is a old one made in America that I've had forever. And I'll usually start the season with that one, just has the right amount of pockets. Backpack's okay. Fanny pack's okay. That's one of those bug tamers, similar to what John Henry talked about, that as the leafy thing that the mosquitoes can't get in. And for people that hunt in the East, especially, there's people that hunt in shorts and a t-shirt in this because it's so hot, but the bugs don't get to them with them. Rain suit, sometimes I'll pack in. Decoys, just two of these relatively basic ones, and I'll share something more about decoys. I'll have a wing there to make that fly down cackle that we'll be sharing, and I believe we do that in the video. Yes, the bag to carry the turkey out, I've always really liked them because it goes on your back like a backpack as well. And I'll typically carry a fan. These fans, along with, say, a Jake and a hen, sometimes that fan will bring them in like a moth to a flame. But if it's a lesser bird, a less dominant bird, it can also scare them away. So think about that. Here's a series of 40 years of decoys. And you look at those bottom ones and you're like, wow, those are really lame. Well, those worked, believe it or not. Then the second gen was something that looked like this, that the coating's peeling off. These are the ones like I showed previously, like typical Walmart decoys. And this is something a little bit higher, but definitely not like the one John Henry uses. Point is this. For me personally, the silhouette is what matters. And if they see that silhouette, that represents a turkey. Now, granted, is realism good and important? Sure it is. But as I like to say, if those decoys are off your left shoulder, we'll talk about decoy placement tomorrow. If they're off your non-shooting shoulder, maybe 15, 20 yards, by the time that bird gets in and realizes, ruh-roh, that ain't real, it's boom. So there's the idea with that. And hey, you use what you want. You can spend $100 or more on decoys. An array of calls, and keep in mind just one thing. Some box calls are short, some long, boat paddles. I don't know if I do have a short push pin in here. Shorter one like this. All have different tone variations. And what a turkey may gobble to on this one day, he won't the next day, but he'll like this boat paddle. And you don't need a lot of calls. I'm not suggesting do it, but turkeys are like people. They have different personalities. So some people like certain people's voices, and it's the same way with turkeys. And here's an example of pot calls that have glass, that have crystal, that have ceramic, that have aluminum, that have copper, and all that provides a little bit of tone with different kinds of strikers. And then, of course, as John Henry mentioned, locator calls have a variety, including hawk, pileated woodpecker, coyote, but mostly use this crow call and the owl hooter. So putting it all together briefly, the vest, good ankle support boots, the shirt, pants, coat, the underwear, polypropylene sock, the hats, the belt, the face mask, a camo hanky, the fingerless gloves, a bag over the head. Sometimes I'll carry DEET just to spray around my neck or ears. I don't need Thermacell. Rarely do I carry binoculars. A headlamp, absolute must, going in the dark. I'm still old school handheld GPS. I carry that. There's my crow call and my my owl hooter. Camo watch. Yes, you don't need it. The bathroom, and I usually put them in plastic bags because of rain or if I fall in the creeks. Always have some food, always have my licenses, North Carolina, Virginia, Tennessee, and a wallet in a bag. My journal, always riding out in the woods. I'll carry at least a liter of water, but it's never enough, and I will refill it, especially if I'm high on the mountains, I'm above roads and stuff where it's a lot safer. That's my diaphragm call box, of course, a box, a pot call, a gobble shaker, my decoys, all in this camo bag, not carrying them without a camo bag. There's that carry out bag for the turkey, the fan, and the wing. So that's pretty much everything I'll carry except for them binoculars. I hunt in the woods, don't need binoculars. Have them, just don't use them. This here is my morning breakfast, and you'll see tomorrow where my morning breakfast happens. Gobble that up in about a minute and a half. These are all the stuff I'll carry because I'm usually out there till at least noon in northern states. And these, as I've gotten older, overuse injuries, support insoles help. So getting to our calls and calling video. And we probably we'll run a little bit over, but we wanted to get everything out to you. Hopefully you'll be sticking around with us because I think our video is about 30 minutes, but I think you'll enjoy it. Keep in mind, if a wild turkey were to enter a calling contest, it wouldn't even place. And that's because turkeys, even when they call, make mistakes, don't sound perfectly right. And we humans get used to competition calling with people that are really good at calling. You do not have to be, nor are we. So we're going to start our video. Hey everyone, I'm Deke James, Hunter Engagement Coordinator for the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission.
Hey guys, I'm John Henry Harrelson. I'm a district biologist with the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission. And today we're talking turkeys. So in front of us we have an array of turkey calls that most hunters would carry with them in the turkey woods. And we're going to go over the basic differences between some of these calls right now. So you have two types of calls, air and friction calls. Air uses, of course, your mouth or air pushing over the call to make a noise. Common calls are like mouth calls, your crow calls, your locator calls, gobbler tubes, even wing bones or trumpet calls. Friction calls use friction, whether you're pushing down on something, using a boat paddle handle.
These box calls are turkey calls. These pot calls, as they're referred to, are turkey calls. So is there one called a push pin? With these pots, again, you're running the striker, but with the air calls, we're going to focus here on locators. For example, a turkey gobble itself is considered a locator, but we'll talk about cautions relative to using that. Most of the locators are calls like crow, pileated woodpecker, owl, and coyote, hawk calls, and things like that. Locator calls are used basically for getting the bird to answer, or when moving on a bird, a gobbler, and turkey calls are for actually calling in that bird.
I agree, Dee. You definitely don't want to use turkey calls or overuse turkey calls in an attempt to locate birds. I use my voice for an owl call. You can practice at home using your voice, or you can buy a owl hoot like Deet has here.
And as an example for a barred owl, which is common in the South, and I am not an expert turkey caller or locator call user, and neither do you need to be. Some can use a natural voice, John Henry will, but I give an example of the barred owl with this call. That can get a bird, especially in the morning, to make a sound, to elicit a sound with that call, and then you figure out where he is and you can set up. Or it could be the crow call, which is typically used later in the day, not in the morning. Just a regular blast or a more aggressive sound. And sometimes that turkey, he's used to hearing that regular blast, but the aggressive can get him to talk.
I will just add that you want to limit your use of turkey calls when you're locating birds. I always go by the adage, I'd like to know where they are before they know where I'm at. And locator calls help you figure that out. All right, so now we're going to go over a couple different common calls that you would make in the woods using a multitude of calls that you see in front of us. So the first call would be the yelp, and this is probably the most common call that you hear in the woods. It's one of the most common calls that turkeys make, and it's a call you hear people use to get birds to come close. And a yelp is just I think it's a simple note that you usually string a couple together, and I'm going to be using the diaphragm call because that's usually what I'm most comfortable with. And it would sound something like this. Deet, what about you? What do you like to use?
Well, I like to use them all, and we will be talking about diaphragm use because obviously it's one of the harder calls to get used to. So I'll try it here with a slate call, and typically my go-to happens to be this glass. I've been carrying it around forever, but as you can see, there's a multitude of surfaces And obviously if you're a retail therapist and like to buy things, then you'll probably have more turkey calls. You don't need a lot of turkey calls, but we'll talk about a variety of sounds, meaning that someday a turkey may like the sound of this, but then other days that turkey may not. So a variety of calls is a good thing, but you don't have to. So for example, yelp. And basically there are several ways to hold a pot. I've seen people hold it like the crab claw. And there's also the Eastern North Carolina stilts that they put on the house in the flood zones. You're basically putting that palm against that call. Don't touch the calling surface. Make sure the surface is scratched up with a piece of emery cloth as well as the striker, and little half circles. That is a pod call yelp.
Another common call, which is very simple to use, is a push button call. And this is actually a call I carry for my kids. This is a call they can use, and it's just simply pushing the plunger here, and inside you're creating friction. So another friction call. So very simple, but again, you're moving your hand just like you're moving your hand on the pot call, and movement is an enemy when you're turkey hunting. So keep that in mind. These calls that you're moving your hands on, there are limitations of using those calls when birds get in close. So up next, what do you think? The cluck. So a cluck is mixed in, another common call that turkey hunters often use and turkeys often make. And you oftentimes, at least I do, I mix it in with my yelps when I start. So usually my first call is a cluck. So it sounds something, at least for me, like this. So I will throw 2 or 3 clucks in and then add in a couple yelps. And that's a really common call sequence that you often see or often hear in the woods from turkeys calling back and forth to each other.
I can try the box here, and I will say that I think maybe we missed the box yelp. With a box, you're basically holding the side. If it has the extra edge on the bottom, keep your call hands away from the center of the call, because that is the tone box. You're just taking this paddle that you keep well chalked, and I will say, don't use school chalk or street chalk. It needs to be turkey chalk. Those other chalks have oil, so that's very important. Most calls come with a little bit of turkey call chalk. So the yelp, and you don't take the call off the call, you don't take the paddle off the calling surface of the box. Simple yelp. With a cluck, as we were talking about, and you can either make it louder if the bird's a little further away, but we don't want to confuse that with the putt. We'll talk about the putt later. How to very easily make it with that.
And you can tell we're not winning any calling contests.
No.
But if you ever spend any time in the woods, you will hear turkeys make a wide variety of calls. And even some of the most, I'll tell you, the worst calling I've ever heard has actually been from live hens. So don't think that just because you don't get it right away that you're not going to be able to call in a turkey. I would encourage you to spend some time in your vehicle. That's what I do, away from my wife and kids, to be able to make these calls, because it does get a little annoying when you're trying to learn how to do this. Yes. The last common call we'll cover is the purr. And a purr is a content call that birds often make when they're in close proximity to each other, when they're feeding, or just when they're meandering through the woods. And for me, it's actually easier to do it on a pot call. I think it's one of the easier calls to do on the pot call. And you're just pushing down your peg and pulling across, which would sound something like this. And the same thing with the push button yelper. You're just slowly. And if you mix that in with a little leaf scratching and a little other content calls, it can really bring birds in and close those final few yards you need when a bird's out of sight or just hanging up right out of distance.
Yeah, there's one we can add with that too, because there's a difference between that soft, subtle purr, as John Henry pointed it out, that can bring them in the last minute. But there's also that aggressive purr that gobblers will do when they're fighting. And it can be a situation where if you have a bird, he's hung up, not coming in, or even has hens with them, that sometimes happen, and we'll be talking about that a lot in our webinar, is an aggressive purr rather than that soft, subtle. And sometimes you got to find a sweet spot on your call rather than that. It's like this. Very, very loud, shrill. That is a fighting purr, and oftentimes that can anger that adult gobbler, that dominant gobbler, into coming, and you're not even using a hen call. We also had a tree yelp. Let's start explaining what that is. What's the tree yelp, and why would we use it?
A tree yelp is one of the first calls you hear in the morning. Usually it's the first call a hen lets out, and she's just letting other hens know in her family group or in her group she's with that, hey, we made it through the night, and usually alerts the gobbler's first gobble in the morning. And it sounds something like a normal yelp, but just really sleepy and really quiet. So I like to make it something like this. Just very quiet, very subdued. I don't want to be loud and aggressive because I've been asleep all night and I'm imitating a real hen, just waking up on the roost, and I want to sound like her. And I'll tell you, another tactic Deke we hadn't talked about is using some of these calls in combination, using a mouth call while you're using a pot call or while you're using a slate call to give the sound that there are multiple turkeys in the woods or you're using multiple turkeys around you.
Now, as an example, and if you're sounding like two hens are better than one to that gobbler. To get them fired up. With that tree call, again, something we'll be talking about. I keep bringing up the webinar, but a lot of this will be covered in strategies. When you talk to that bird with that tree call, if that bird answers you immediately or cuts you off, that bird's ready. And in most cases, you can just put the calls down and let that bird find you. Would you agree, John Henry?
I agree, but I'll tell you, it's awful hard to put those calls down sometimes.
It is hard to put them down because, and I call too much too loud, but sometimes we can actually make that bird hang up and not come in, because what is the natural way of the wild turkey, Henry?
The natural way is for a gobbler to strut in one spot and for the hens to all come to him.
That's right.
And so we're trying to change that and make the hens stationary and the gobbler come to us.
Yes.
So it's a cat and mouse game.
Yes. Overcalling can definitely affect that. Here's another call, the gobble. And we didn't mention the putt, so we'll need to mention that too. The gobble of the wild turkey will challenge dominance just like the fighting purr or even a gobbler call, and I want to mention that one too. Almost forgot about it. Or no, that's an advanced tactic. We'll talk about that. Anyway, the gobble call. This is something you need to use very sparingly on public land, not often suggested, because if you're hunting with other hunters or even on private land, soon as a turkey hunter hears a gobble, that person wants to get as close as possible without scaring that bird and then set up and call it. So when you shake a gobble call like this, you're both challenging that bird, but you could attract other hunters. So use it sparingly. But again, the idea is that bird's hung up, maybe he's with his hens, hen calls aren't working. Sometimes this can bring them in, but again, use it with caution. Okay, folks, now we're going to talk about the mouth diaphragm. The mouth diaphragm is obviously one of the harder to use, but what's great about it is it's hands-free, a variety of sounds and tones and cadence, easier to carry, much lighter, and one of the things that's most important is proper fit. For example, this one is really a standard size, and you can see it's kind of worn. I've had it for quite a while, but they come in all different sizes and colors. And one of the things we want to note right off the bat is your palate may be different than someone else's. Some people have a narrow palate up there in the roof of the mouth, some is wider. As a general rule, I like a standard call, which is like this, but some of these more narrow calls also work better. They'll have a variety of reeds, which is the latex in the middle. They'll have different cuts, and they'll make different sounds. But the initial way to get a sound out of it, before we make any calls, is the first thing you want to do with the call. It'll typically have a tab or a point on the bottom of the call. And that's an aluminum frame. It's like a latex tape on the outside, almost like a hospital tape. And then narrow reeds that are crimped in between an aluminum frame. And it typically comes when you buy the call. The instructions are in there. You want the tab down. When you put it in your mouth, it goes up in the roof of your mouth, and your tongue goes up against it underneath, like that. And typically your tongue is just right out in front of that reed. What you're doing is you're not blowing air, even though it's an air call, you're huffing air from your diaphragm, huffing it out. And by making them sounds, it causes those reeds to vibrate. Now what you'll discover is that early in the season, when you get started again, it'll tickle your tongue and you'll go like that. And you just scrape your tongue with your teeth, and that's kind of my routine. But that goes away after you start calling. But the first thing you want to do is make a high note and then a low note. You make a high note by a lot of tongue pressure. You make a low note by less tongue pressure. And then what you do is put them together. So you find the proper place, not way back in your throat, right in the front, not far behind your teeth. Put it in there. And when you first put it in, walk around with it, get used to it. Because the first thing that will happen in your mouth is you'll start to salivate. That's the natural food start to prepare it for digestion. And if you start making calls right away, you'll probably start spitting and everything else. Well, if you're in the woods, that's not really a good thing. If you're competition calling, that's even worse. But the idea is get used to it in your mouth. You'll stop salivating after a while. Then once you do, put it up in there. High note. Then the low note, a little bit less tongue pressure. And then you put them all together. And typically, when you see someone turkey calling, they'll be doing this, they'll be doing this, they'll be doing that. Not only does it hide up the silly face you make with the call, but it also can let the turkey know that, hey, if he's not so interested, I'm going away. You can muffle the sound. He starts circling you over this way. Throw the call this way. Starts circling you over that way. Throw the call that way. That way you're controlling, essentially, the sound. So for me, with this call, put it in there. Now you'll notice that is what is typically my go-to. But I will say that the thicker the reeds, the harder it is to force air. So if you're a new hunter, start out with a very thin reed, 2-reed call or a 3-reed call, and then just try a variety. See what works best.
I would encourage you to buy a variety pack. Get a 3 or 4 pack off the internet from a reputable call company and see which one you like best and try out making different calls with them. And Dixie Deer class is coming up. That's another great place to go around and buy a variety of calls from a variety of people and see what sounds they're making and see what sounds best to you. I carry 3 or 4 mouth calls with me when I go hunting, and each one makes a slightly different sound. And oftentimes I'll even carry 2 in my mouth at one time, one on each side of the cheek, and switch them back and forth when I'm calling and when I'm trying to close that final distance with those birds.
And do keep it in the side of your mouth when you're climbing ridges. I tend to hunt in the mountains rather than on flat land. You start breathing a little bit. You don't want that right into place unless you're working a bird, because you don't want to swallow it and end up that situation. So yeah, just be careful.
There are some significant pros and cons to having the mouth call in.
Yes.
A big pro, you're not using your hands. So when you're sitting or kneeling against the tree or in your gobbler chair and you have your gun on your shoulder waiting for that bird to come in, you don't have to take your hands off and work a pot call or work a gobbler tube or even a wing bone. You can go no hands.
Never store them on the dash in a car, because that will immediately glue them together. So caring for these is great. The only downside is I'd say I get maybe 2 seasons out of a call, and then it starts the tape wears off. So you've got to replace them, unlike the pot call or the box call or some of the other calls. But yes, hands-free, variety of calls, And obviously, as we showed earlier, using 2 calls at one time makes it much easier.
Yeah. Deet's a little more extreme than I am on caring for his calls. This call I have in my mouth, I took it out of my bag this morning and I haven't touched it since last hunting season when I put it in my bag, and it ran just fine on the way here. So there's some wins and losses.
You'll find your own style. That's what you go with. Okay, folks, we're going to get into our last segment here, and that's going to be advanced calling techniques. We also, in our webinars, hopefully, yes, you're watching that right now, perhaps, we'll be talking about advanced tactics, but this is advanced calling. So we're going to share 3. I'm going to start out with cutting. I'll start with a diaphragm. I do like to cut with a diaphragm, but I'll probably pick up a box and a slate as well, just real quick to give you examples. Cutting with a diaphragm, it's real fast, not yelps, but clucks. And it's an excited hen. She's excited in coming into the gobbler. And by and large, other than the start out with the yelp or maybe a purr or a tree call, I like the cut. So if I find that that bird is fired up and he's gobbling, I will call too much too loud. But remember too, once that bird gets to a position where you can see him and he can see you, do not make any calls, because then immediately that bird will pick you out. And since you will not be a turkey, you'll be gone. Cutting. Usually I'll start out with maybe a cluck, couple yelps, and then I'll go into a cut. And you don't have to make, it's okay to come back to a purr, it's okay to come back to a cluck, and even if you end on a sour note, like, just cover it up, keep going. That's an example. Because if you stop, that can be a bad thing. Say on a box call, cutting. On a slate. And again, remember, sounding like 2 birds, diaphragm, and a pot or a box. That is cutting.
So up next would be the fly down cackle, and the fly down cackle is a sequence of sounds that a hen will often make when she's flying down from the roost in the morning. And it's a sequence that I use when a gobbler's already gobbled a couple of times on the roost, and I want him to think, hey, come on over here to the hen that's over here, not the hens that are over there. So I usually started off with a few light hen yelps, kind of like Deek did, and then progress into getting louder. And you can add different things into it. Some people have wings with them to simulate the fly down. Some people take their hat off and beat it against their leg. People do a wide variety of things to add sounds to this call. But for me, I try to keep it simple, and I use something like this. And I tend to start high and then kind of coast off like she's flying down out of the tree, getting ready to hit the ground. And usually as she's hitting the ground, she turns off that cackle and starts yelping afterwards. Do you do anything different?
Same thing, usually use my hat, or sometimes a wing. A turkey wing works nice if you save that from a previous gobbler. But yeah, basically the same thing.
Okay. The next call that we cover would be gobbles. So Dee kind of talked about the gobbler shaker earlier. I tend to gobble with my diaphragm. I shake my head, it gets a different sound. But again, you usually sparingly. I don't typically use it on public land, but oftentimes my favorite time to use it is when I know there's multiple gobblers together that are grouped up. I've either seen them in the field somewhere, or I've heard them gobbling together, and then I want to imitate a lone gobbler, maybe even with a hen, and they try to encourage one of them to come over and investigate and be dominant over top of me. So for me, a gobble sounds something like this. And Dee's just demonstrated on the gobble tube, and there's a couple different ways you can work that.
Yep, this can either be used this way, by hand, by using the plunger by hand, or just shaking it. But again, be careful using the gobble call, because you could attract another hunter, and many won't even use it if they're hunting public land, unless they're in a really isolated area.
Yep. So just like you can hear that gobble, and you want that gobbler to hear that gobble, so can other hunters in the area.
The spit and drum is probably not used by a lot of hunters. There are calls that are made to spit and drum, but although I bought them, I have yet to make them work. It's just, you've got to like say things like chukka, 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 and my mouth just don't want to do it. That's why I don't purr well with a diaphragm. And in fact, when we were young and you know, people could flutter their tongue. I can't do that, and that makes good purrs. But for the spit and drum, that is a call that a gobbler makes when he goes from just being, all his feathers are down, he'll go into that strut. He's getting ready to display for that hen, and he'll basically puff up and he'll go. And if that bird's close, you'll hear that. And if that bird's close, don't move. If you hear that sound, that means he's close. So again, he'll go from that just walking, he'll all of a sudden bring that, you'll start seeing the wings and the tail going up. And if you can do that with your face mask on, so you're not moving your mouth, you just never know.
That's one of my favorite sounds in the woods to hear, because that means that bird's close, and usually if I haven't seen him already, I'm gonna see him very shortly.
And then you're doing this. So be careful, don't move.
I'm usually doing this,
Yes.
clicking the safety off. So up next would be the kiki. The kiki is like a whistling type call that you often hear hens making in the fall when they're together, or when a large group of hens are together. And to me, it's one of those kind of locator calls or keep in touch calls that they tend to make to let each other know where they are as they're feeding throughout the day. Dee, let's hear the kiki.
Yep, and this can be a bird that's, say, maybe a non-dominant gobbler, because there's a dominant gobbler and then there's lesser gobblers, often referred to as satellites or subordinates. He may be looking for a buddy. Maybe his buddy was harvested or he's by himself. That fall call was a, hey, I'm over here, you know, let's get together kind of thing. Is it commonly used in the spring? No, but it can be the difference when a turkey's not responding to a yelp or a gobble. Not my bad. Whistle followed by yelps. Again, it's just another trick in the bag of tricks. Okay, gobbler yelping. Something from my many years of the fine collection of now obsolete VHS videos and DVDs. One hunter from Missouri used to often use gobble yelping. Why use gobble yelping? You want to sound like a hen in the spring. It's the mating season. But that is another thing that challenges the dominance of another male, and especially if the area that you're hunting in, for example, I typically start in a northern state in the mountains where it's much colder, and although the photo period is what brings turkeys into breeding, you could be having a late spring. When you have a late spring, again, even though the amount of sunlight is what brings them in to breeding, they can get in almost like a fall mood, and gobblers will gobble yelp, and using a gobble yelp can challenge that dominance, or even say, hey, I'm another, you know, I'm looking for a buddy, because gobblers hang together in the fall and late winter. So the difference is, and I'll use this, the slate, it's probably the easiest to do, is a regular hen yelp is a faster cadence. Regular hen yelp. Gobbler yelp is more like this. Slow it down, not fast. And they'll even cluck sometimes in that. That's a gobbler yelp.
I tend to hear the gobbler yelp when it's a group of jakes together that can't quite gobble or haven't developed their gobble all the way, and they tend to yelp back and forth to other gobblers that are gobbling or even to hens that are calling. That's when I tend to hear that gobble yelp most often.
Okay, folks, the last call we're going to use is not a call that you would use in turkey hunting. It is an alarm call that the turkeys use. And in fact, if you hear this sound, it means if you don't have a shot at that bird, if that bird is out of range, if that bird is not seen, you can pretty much guarantee you won't get a shot, and it is called the putt. And we just want you to know what it is so you can recognize it. And we don't use a box call or a slate call or a diaphragm. You probably could use a diaphragm, but I can just usually make the call with my loud, annoying voice, and it basically goes like this. And if you hear that sound, that is the worst sound. It is so disheartening because it means that turkey saw something it didn't like, and before you know it, him and the others are doing it, and they're going the other way.
Well, yeah, I'll tell you, last season I had a hen doing that alarm call, and I started calling over top of her. She was separate from the gobblers. She, of course, ran off. Those gobblers kept coming on in. So that doesn't always mean that putt, doesn't always mean the bird you're chasing is the one that saw you, but you definitely don't want to hear that sound in the woods. That's not one we're going for.
Absolutely, good point.
So I guess the final few things to wrap up here. You don't have to be perfect to call a turkey in. You don't have to be an expert to call a turkey in. You can do it with a few simple calls. You can get at Walmart, you can get at Amazon, or you can go extravagant and buy handmade custom calls. But I encourage you to practice your calls before season, but don't practice them in the woods. You're educating birds for later on in the season when you don't need that education.
Yes, and I will say with the mouth diaphragm, the first time I picked it up, I was like, I'm never going to get this. And once you do that, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And you don't want to do it around family members because it will drive them nuts. So a good way to do it at that time when I first started doing it was probably in the late 80s, is I would go out, there was a park near where I lived, and at night after work I'd go for walks and I'd keep trying it. Well, finally, when I got them sounds, and if you do practice it in a way, like I said, the high note, low note, you will eventually pick it up. It may take some time, but even if you don't, the box, the slate, the push-pull, those calls work. And again, getting to the point of calling, you're going to love to call, you're going to call too much. Use calling sparingly. Again, if you're convinced that bird sounds like he's coming closer and he's responding, let him find you. You don't need to keep calling, because keep in mind that every time you do call, that bird's typically, even if you can't see him, he'll go into that strut, he'll do the spit and drum. He's expecting that hen to show up. So let him seek you out.
Patience has killed more turkeys than calling ever has.
Exactly.
A little tip.
Exactly. Good luck this season. Be ethical, be safe, and pass it on.
It's a good ending, Dee.
Okay, folks. Hopefully you survived that. We're a little worried that we'll have maybe some pro staff scouting us and won't be able to retire from here. Ha ha ha. If you want to listen to Wild Turkey Sounds, go to the NWTF website. They actually have recordings of turkeys, so you can listen to all the turkey sounds that are there and practice on your own. And so it's a pretty neat opportunity. Time for Q&A, and of course we did run long. We apologize for that, but then again, hopefully you got something out of it. So before we do, let's hit that again to our officers that are hopefully here, and our video didn't put us to sleep, and you can share in that if you want. What's the most common turkey hunting related violations for which there's no excuse, just so these folks know? And feel free, whoever talks first.
This is Eric Gleason, Master Officer out of Caldwell County. Nathan said last night, certainly failing to tag or register your harvested bird is one of the most common. Another one is using some sort of bait to hunt turkeys is also very common. Other things that we do see is as smartphones have become popular, people using turkey calling apps. It is unlawful to use an electronic turkey call, And like I said, it doesn't have to be like a Fox Pro or something that you go buy at a sporting goods store. It could be a downloaded app on your phone. Also, misidentification of birds, somebody misidentifying a hen and shooting a hen instead of a legal bearded bird. So those are just a few. We do see others, including trespassing and over the limit and all sorts of other things. But know the law. If you have questions, look up your Regs Digest or pick up the phone and call your local officer. We're happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Awesome, and thank you for that. Did you have anything to add, Nathan? Okay, we may not have him at the moment. That's okay.
No, D, that was spot on Officer Gleason.
Okay, good. Well, again, thank you guys for being here tonight. So obviously with this slide, I bring it up again before we start our Q&A. I don't always come right to your call, but you do. I do when it's 30 minutes after you left. And I will say this that I didn't mention last night. Many of the times when I was calling in a bird, I would be like, okay, he's not coming in. I would get up and I'd hear, or I was moving and calling, which I like to cut and run. I get to a ridge, not hearing a bird. I crest the ridge and there a bird takes off. So patience is your best virtue. As I say, when the recordings are available, I will send them out along with our post-webinar surveys. And so please complete them. Helps us to improve the programming. So let's pull up our questions and see what we have. I got a hello. Doing good for sure. Are hunters allowed to hunt turkey with a crossbow? I think we kind of covered that. Gentlemen, do you have any comments for the crossbows and the regulations?
Nope, I think you covered it perfectly well. Crossbows are a legal, lawful method of take.
Okay, and it used to be that you needed a disabled permit to do it, but states realized that it can be open to everyone. It's not going to hurt the population. And obviously one of the good things about it is it's much easier to become proficient. Okay, one thing I see missing from layouts is an IFAK with tourniquet. Is this something you carry but just didn't include? John Henry, do you carry anything like that? I will say, just to mention briefly, I carry a couple Band-Aids in my wallet, but that's about it. How about you guys, including our enforcement when you hunt?
Yeah, that's a really good idea. So I do carry a tourniquet in my turkey bag because I mean, you think about it, there's multiple things that could happen. You could be shot by another hunter. You could fall from a tree or fall from some obstruction. So, I certainly carry one. I know myself and Officer Gleason hunt from Florida to Texas to Nebraska. And, that's something that we probably both carry in our vests. I think it's something very practical that could potentially save your life one day.
Okay. Do you carry anything, John Henry, Band-Aids or anything?
I've started carrying like a little small first aid kit I kind of put together that has a few Band-Aids, maybe some tape, just a few little small things in case things go bad. But I definitely pack differently when I'm further away from my vehicle than I anticipate. Going hunting on a little private spot, I may not carry it. Going on a public land all day walk, I'm definitely going to have some kind of first aid with me.
How about you, Eric?
Yeah, I do carry a first aid kit. Particularly, I walk a lot, so I carry a lot of foot care things like Leukotape, Band-Aid, things for blisters, and tourniquet is certainly a good idea. If it's all right, Deed, I'd like to address the anonymous comment above that. If you watch this video and you do feel lost, that's okay. I would really encourage you to go on YouTube and watch some of the turkey hunts that you can find on YouTube and watch some of these calls in action as people are hunting, and look up videos of wild turkeys just in the woods. One of the best ways that you can learn how turkeys call is by watching live birds. So just look up a video of a wild turkey walking through the woods and making different calls, and get your calls out and try to imitate those calls as the turkey is making those calls on the video. And that'll help you maybe put the pieces together a little bit better than us rambling on.
Right. And since I, again, perhaps slid over that one, also keep in mind, if you're a brand new person, remember I mentioned the GSO workshop, that is definitely for the very, very basics. I mean, we threw everything at you tonight, but if that's something you potentially qualify for, being brand new, extremely new hunter, don't have the social support, then I suggest you reach out to me. And then we can get you in there. I know that each turkey is different, and we did get accolades with great seminar and stuff, and we appreciate that, folks. And please save it for the survey, that's for sure. I know that each turkey is different, but what call tends to blow up a hunt more than others? I'm not kind of sure. Do you know what they mean by blow up, John Henry? That could be good or bad, I guess.
Blow up, I usually think of bad. And usually what I see blows up a turkey hunt is when I get impatient and I make too many calls or I try to rush. My whole goal, I try to get inside their bubble, which is a couple 100 yards, and then be patient and let them come to me that last little bit. So I think what blows up hunt more than anything is impatience and overcalling.
Right. And I think since now he helped to clarify it for me, don't make the putt sound. Can we see the seminar later if we join late? Yes, as I said from the beginning, I don't know if you joined late. These are recorded. They have to be processed first, and you will receive them. Since you're in the system, obviously, you'll receive them by March 1. They need to be processed. I'm in a Charlotte area. Ranges here don't allow bird shot loads. Where can I go? Well, some of the other ranges I know do have shotgun opportunities, but you're right, that's more limited. It's mostly about pistols, rifles, and also clay birds, but not so much shotguns. And before I turn it over to our enforcement or even John Henry, again, on our website is where to hunt and shoot. And look at the ranges. Some of our WRC ranges have shotgun shooting opportunities, or see if you can get on maybe a piece of private land if you have friends or know a landowner that would allow you to shoot. Any comments from you guys regarding where he can shoot the bird shot, where he can pattern his gun?
I'm not sure if they allow birdshot or not, but the nearest NC Wildlife shooting complex to you is probably going to be in Cherryville, which is down around the Gaston County, Cleveland County line, the Foothills Public Shooting Complex. I'm not sure if they allow birdshot. There are lots of private ranges. I'd just pick up the phone and I'd call the different ranges and ask them specifically before I made the trip.
Okay, and we had a thank you. You're very welcome. How do I legally harvest turkey if I unintentionally take 2 turkeys with 1 shot? There you go, guys.
I don't fully understand the question, but there is a daily bag limit. You can only harvest 1 bird per day. When we talk about hunter safety, and when you take your hunter safety class, we talk a lot about being sure of your shot, only taking safe, legal, ethical shots, and patterning your shotgun and knowing what your shotgun's going to do. If you're shooting and the birds are too close together, that falls on you as a hunter. So it's up to you to make sure that when you pull the trigger, you're only hitting your intended target. So maybe that means waiting just a minute and letting those birds space out or whatever you need to do. But every time any one of us pulls the trigger on a firearm, we are responsible where that bullet or where that shot ends up, whether that's in our intended target, whether that's accidentally in somebody's house, or that's into a person. You are 100% responsible for what you shoot. So make sure that if you pull the trigger, you're only going to hit your intended target.
Yep, good answer. So I can check out the pattern, my shotgun. Yes, that's the idea. You want to pattern that gun to be sure that that densest part of that load, the most pellets are in the center. And yes, you need to do it. And especially the further the range, like if that bird's, 10, 15 yards, chances are it's not a big concern, but that bird gets out 25, 30 yards, that can make the difference between a cripple and a harvest. Are there any laws in NC about the shotguns that can be used aside from gauge? Gentlemen, any comments on that? And ammo capacity?
No, you're not required to have a plug in your shotgun for turkeys if that's what you're referring to, like you would for migratory game birds. If you wanted to take your plug out and put 4, 5, 6 shells in it, there's no law talking about that. It's just the no shotgun older than a 10 gauge is the only specific thing that I can come up with off the top of my head in regards to shotguns.
Now I'm going to play devil's advocate. I don't think there's any fully automatic shotguns, is there? So that wouldn't be legal. Right.
Not that I'm aware of, but
Okay.
yeah, of course, fully automatic weapons are not legal in North Carolina.
Yep.
But yeah, whether you wanted to use a single shot, a pump, an over under, a semi-automatic, if you've got like an old school bolt action shotgun, whatever you want to use.
There you go. We have a share, just a PSA about ticks. My first season 2 years ago, I got about 20 ticks, contracted Lyme disease. Last year, treated my clothes with permethrin, tied the bottom of my pants shut, 0 ticks. Yes, very good point there. And I use that permethrin myself. And in fact, I'm glad you mentioned that because I will add that can, even though, again, I'm hunting the cooler climates. It's much cooler. Yes, great information. Also carry a suture kit as part of my first aid kit, very small kit. There you go. There's a share for everybody. Thanks, helpful. In the diagram about where to shoot, why was the aim point different from the crosshairs? The diagram from where to shoot. Yeah, I'm kind of forgetting about the photo. Can anybody relate to that while I'm drawing a blank here? Diagram about where to shoot. Why was the aim point different from the crosshairs? You guys remember that? No? I guess I'm going to have to get that, look back in the slide, and you can email me, and I'm going to have to look at that again because I'm a little confused. Okay, we'll get that one later. What shot is best for turkey? 4, 6, 7, high brass best. John Henry, what's your opinion? We didn't really hit the shot size so much. What do you say?
If I'm shooting shot that's not TSS, so if I'm shooting, copper or lead or plated shot, I've shot 6s, I've shot 4s. There's like the Magnum blend is 5, 6s, and 7s. 4s to 6s are very common. You definitely want to be shooting a turkey load, which is a high brass load. If you're shooting TSS, some of those shots are 8s, 9s, 9.5s, and even 10 shot. But you're also shooting a lot more pellets and a lot more dense pattern with those shells. So what he's got listed there, 4, 6s, they both work, and high brass definitely.
Yeah. Back in the day, 4s were huge. That was a staple. And then like 5s and 6s, and 5 is kind of that happy medium. But yeah, now with the higher density, like John Henry said, they go much smaller. Another thank you. Is it legal to take archery target to public lands and practice archery? I know it's not legal to target practice with lawn guns on public land. Gentlemen, you want to address that?
So each game land is going to have different regulations. You just need to look at the game lands portion of the Regs Digest. Many of the game lands say that target shooting is prohibited, and they don't specify archery or firearm equipment. So that being said, by the black and white letter of the law, if it says target shooting is prohibited, then no, you could not do that. I would say those laws are specific to firearms. I don't think that they were intended to mean archery equipment, but if it says target shooting is prohibited, then I would say that does encompass all target shooting. So just look at specific game land in your Regs Digest and see what it says.
Okay, and we have one here. Last night I was able to see questions submitted and answered during the seminar. Tonight I'm unable to see the various question and answers. Am I doing something wrong? Now that really has to do with me, and here's why. It's intended to have our questions answered at the Q&A and have focus on the content and not writing. Well, it's okay to write the question, but if we're going back and forth answering and writing, then it's easy to get away from the content. And we've had it in the past where people were answering questions ahead of time, and it's not a terrible thing, but then folks were asking questions about things we already covered. So that's why we did it. It seems to work the best. Now, granted, if I had the most complaints by somebody, obviously we try to work for you. We're serving you, but that's why focus on the content. Maybe think about or write the questions as we're going, but then cover them at the end. Check on McDowell shooting range. There we have a suggestion for shooting the shotgun. And depending on where you are, Lentz is a good one too, at the Lentz complex in Ellerby. I use a game land on the off season. I use a game land on the off season to pattern my shotguns. So there, somebody disclosed it. And hopefully that one doesn't say prohibited, because most of them are prohibited now. And you know what, folks? It really happens because most, no, I'm not going to say most, that's overgeneralizing, but people go out there with bottles and cans and trash and end up littering, and that's why they end up like that. Or they're doing it in an unsafe manner. Would you enforcement guys agree with that?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
So
that's
that-
right. I'd second.
So that's why that happens. Last night there were questions answered, not selected, and I was able to see them. I don't know, maybe I missed something. So if that's the case, that's my fault, and I'll work on doing better. And if you were one of them that sent it, you send it to me and I'll make sure it gets addressed. I'm not sure if I can make them all visible. In fact, maybe I can or maybe I can't, but I am reading all of them. So I don't know if that's possible. I'll check with our IT folks. Perhaps they can. I know they can be answered live written, but I don't know about talking here. Something I'll check into. Any recommendations for new young hunter education, videos, etc.? My son's 15 years old and very interested in turkey hunting. Well, obviously these videos, once you get them, and as I always say, folks, unlike 30, 40 years ago, there are a ton of videos that you can get online, most of which are pretty good. The only thing to be concerned about is somebody trying to sell you something. And I'll tell you right now, go on eBay or Amazon and type in turkey hunting DVD, turkey hunting VHS, if you still have one, and you'll get more than you'll have money to buy that are pretty good. Thinking about hunting hill country this season, is there any information on the best way to set up a gobbler? You'll be getting that tomorrow night. So hopefully you'll be tuning in, because, you know, the idea was to stay within the gear and the calling tonight. So that's tomorrow, and strategies and tactics. JH mentioned clippers, John Henry, and a brush for a spot to hunt. For confirmation, I was thinking we're not allowed to cut brush on game lands. Has that changed? John Henry and/or officers.
So again, you would just need to refer to each individual specific game land. I'm not aware of a game land that in my specific patrol area where that would be a problem. That's, you know, I haven't seen, nor have I worked every piece of public land across the state. So there might be specific game lands with specific restrictions like that, but certainly all of them do not have that restriction. So you would just need to look in your regs book, look at the specific game land that you're looking to hunt and go to, and just see what those restrictions may be.
And I will even just add that as someone that rarely does that, I'll carry a pair of clippers. What I will not do is cut anything that's a mass tree, like say like, you know, maybe sweet gum or something like that, you know, or like, yeah, certain things that aren't going to produce food for wildlife. And you can become familiar with tree species. Again, so many places online or so many books. So don't be cutting anything that's going to provide food for wildlife. Do you know how many turkeys generally roost together? that, I don't know if John Henry's still here. I know I let him do some of the biology or most of it, because he's the D4 biologist. Are you still there, John Henry?
Yeah, I'm still here, Deke.
Okay. Do you know how many turkeys generally roost together?
It really depends on time of year, and also sex. So male turkeys, if it's during peak breeding season, oftentimes they are roosted alone or roosted with a buddy. You may see two birds together or three birds together, three gobblers together. They oftentimes roost separate from the hens. And with hens, you could have a multitude of hens that are roosting together. As far as the clippers go, I'll say, like if I'm going to sit down next to a tree that's got a bunch of briars beside it, I'm going to use those clippers to clip me out a little hole to get away from that briar patch. I'm not out there like cutting massive trees down or cutting shooting lanes like you would think you're establishing a stand site. So just keep that in mind.
What is your thoughts on turkeys crossing a ditch or small creek? I'll jump on that one. We covered that last night. Those things are considered barriers, meaning that turkey can fly across anything or jump over anything, but it'll typically hang up behind those things. So what you want to do is make sure that when you're calling to that bird, and this is by getting out there and scouting in advance and knowing the lay of the land, as soon as that bird gobbles, if you've got a ditch or a log way out in front of you out of gun range, you want to move to a different location, even if that means 10 yards east or west. That bird, and I mentioned last night too, there are no absolutes. So sometimes that bird will jump over a log or it will fly across the river to get to you. And sometimes it won't. Make his path as easy to get to you as possible. He will prefer to take a path of least resistance. So we have two more questions. We're going to address that and then probably going to cut it. I like that questions were hidden tonight. I got a little distracted trying to read every question last night. So there you go. Different folks thinking different things. How far would you say, set up? How far would you set up decoys in front of your position? Again, something that's coming up tomorrow night, but John Henry, if you want to stab it, go ahead.
Yeah, I tend to like to set decoys up about 20 yards away from me. Usually off to the side, not directly in line between me and that gobbler. I want him, if I'm using decoys, I want him looking at the decoys, not at the bush off to the side where I'm going to be hitting at or against that tree. And also, if you set them further out, if some birds are decoy shy, which means they don't want to come all the way into a decoy. So if they hang up 10 or 15 yards away from that decoy, and they're at 20, they're still in shotgun range for me. You put them closer, I think you run the risk of birds seeing you move, but it's all up to personal preference and really just trial and error in each individual situation.
Yep, and I will just add this, and you'll hear me say it again tomorrow night, but it's the last one. We'll be letting it go with this is whatever your maximum range of your shotgun, if that's 30, 40 yards, don't put it at 30, 40 yards, because if that bird gets suspicious and hangs up further away, you can't shoot that bird. He's out of gun range. So I'll typically go 15, even 20 yards, no more than 25 yards, because that way, if he gets a little shy, he's probably going to still be in killing distance. So don't put him too far away. Don't put him too close, because if they're too close, then the turkey might pick you out too. There's no absolutes. Thank you all for being here tonight. I want to thank my panelists again for assisting, John Henry Harrelson and our Master Sergeants Nathan Cox and Eric Gleason. Tomorrow night is the last webinar where we get into the tactics and advanced tactics. And I wish you folks all a great night. Thank you so much for being here. And hopefully see you tomorrow night. Hope you had some fun. Have a great evening, everybody. Good night.